Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the ISBEO SafetyNet webinar series presented today by IBAC and ISBEO and Polaris Aero. The subject is safety culture. People are your greatest asset. I am Catherine Hilst. I'm the ISBEO Operations Manager, and I am the hostess for today. I do have a few housekeeping items for you due to the number of attendees. We do have all audience members on mute, and you'll stay on mute, but you'll see in your control panel that there is a place for you to ask any questions or submit any comments you might have, and those are welcome anytime during the session. You'll see it on the bottom of the panel. It'll say questions, and just a note here that our presenters today are going to ask you to share some examples you might have of good safety culture. So feel free to submit those at any time. They'll talk about that again here in just a second. And again, if you have any questions, you can put those in at any time, and we will address them a little later in the presentation. So very excited to host this webinar by Polaris Aero, discussing every organization's greatest asset, your people. At the heart of all organizations, you'll find people that do the work, whether scheduling, dispatching, or actually navigating the flight, or repairing, marshaling, or fueling the aircraft so it's ready for the flight. You train them, provide them resources, and then they need to perform. This presentation will consider the soft skills of motivating people to be the best they can be in their profession, contribute to the greater team effort, and ultimately form the nucleus of a safety foundation that routinely performs at the top of their game and is resilient to changing conditions. Our presenter today is Steve Bruneau. He's the Vice President of Aviation Services at Polaris Aero and is responsible for expanding the company's suite of safety management solutions. Prior to joining Polaris, he was the Chief Operating Officer of Pulsar Informatics, delivering fatigue risk management system to aviation organizations of all FAR types, including their maintenance and ground handling departments. Steve has over 25 years of process consulting experience helping organizations meet regulatory requirements or achieve new levels of performance. Steve has a BS in mechanical engineering, an MS in aerospace engineering, and has been a leader of 3 successful startup companies prior to joining Polaris. Joining Steve today will be his colleagues Kelly Roby and Cesar Gonzalez. And note, Cesar will be presenting the same topic tomorrow in both Portuguese and Spanish, in case you want to see it in those versions. And I'll be putting links for future webinars in the chat session. So with that, Steve, welcome, and hand it off to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you, IBAC, for having Polaris participate in the SafetyNet webinar series. We love to contribute our thinking and our thought leadership around all the different perspectives that can impact your safety program. I'm thrilled to have Kelly and Cesar joining me as well, and hopefully at the end we'll have some spirited dialogue. As Catherine indicated at the front, normally these sessions will end with a Q&A, still have Q&A. But if you don't have questions, what we'd really love, since we have so many people on the call, is to just put a little blurb in there about some of the good examples of safety culture that you may have experienced where you're at now or prior places in your career path. So again, we really foster safety sharing at Polaris Aero, and while we have a lot of good things to add, we know we're not the only resource. So as much as we can expose people to many ideas, that's better for everybody. So keep that in mind, and please contribute near the end. So again, today we're going to talk about the people side of safety, because fundamentally that's, in our opinion, probably the most important piece. So what's this presentation going to look like? Our agenda is going to kind of follow really a lot of the kinds of lessons learned that we've experienced through our careers. And one of the things we're going to talk about a lot is people, process, and technology. This is something that you may have seen hammered home in a lot of the Polaris SafetyNet webinars over the years. We're going to talk about the journey that each of us is on with our organizations, because it isn't like once and done. This is something that continues to happen. We want to talk about preparedness and execution, 2 sides of the equation there. We want to get into the SMS aspects and where the people touch points are relative to that. We want to distinguish between culture and safety, and just culture, and make sure that's clear and how they both fit together. And we want to talk about how to elevate your team around buy-in, which is a very critical piece to the whole thing. We're going to get some tactical examples specific to safety relative procedures and such in your organization, which hopefully will improve buy-in. and then we'll wrap up with some takeaways. So again, a big part of what you're going to see here is an aggregation of a lot of lessons learned that I've had over my career. Cesar's contributed as well. So these are things that, again, many of you may have seen in the past or have other like examples that have influenced how you've evolved in your career as well as in your leadership positions. So as I said, we're going to start with just a recap of the most important piece of any initiative that a business can go through. And if you sat through any of the safety nets that we've given in the past, we're really big believers in the people, process, and technology side. So relative to people, obviously they need to be well trained, they need to be appropriately resourced, engaged and empowered, and of course encouraged by their leadership, right? A big part of that, and we're going to focus a lot on the people side. But there's two other legs to the stool. That's the process, right, that you follow, and processes should be complete and well defined. They should be lean and not bureaucratic. Certainly processes should be flexible to some extent as long as they're results oriented. And then of course, technology is the third leg of the stool, where it should be simple, meaningful, and seamless. So while we're going to focus on people today and sort of their eagerness to participate, you can see that processes and technology can have a great influence on people, right? Who loves to work in a bureaucratic organization? Probably very few hands just went up, right? Who loves to go to work and have technology get in the way of their day job, or work with, bad equipment that's outdated and not well maintained, right? So you can see that if you're going to do a job, you really need to have the people and the process and the technologies that you're using, no matter what your job is, all working together, and they all influence one another. We're going to focus primarily on people today, but again, people, process and technology does play a role, and we'll talk about that as well. So when you think about the organizational safety of your company, it really is a journey. And it's important to understand that people play a role in that journey. So when you think about where your organization is now, and wherever you consider you are from a high performance or can improve perspective, the reality of it is you come to things like SafetyNet, or you attend other types of sessions to learn more so that you can reduce risk, right? You want to act, you want to put in place better procedures and motivate your team so that you reduce risk and perform at a higher level. And to the extent you don't do that, then obviously you're increasing risk, right? So again, when you attend things like this and you learn things and you get the most out of your team and whatnot, you're continually lifting the bar higher and higher as you go. But what happens, of course, is when there's a key retirement, for example, sometimes what can happen is that momentum, if you will, can take 2 steps backwards, right? And it'll take some time to recover and get back up to full strength. You can almost make the argument that sometimes when a certain leader retires, there's actually an upward momentum if they've been kind of a stick in the mud and haven't been able to help the organization get ahead for quite some time. But the point of the matter is, whenever there is a key retirement, there's going to be a transition in the staff. And that transition in the staff will have some bit of a hiccup that you want to be able to address and get back on the upward swing as quickly as possible. But as we know in business aviation, this is not a once and done thing, right? Turnover is something that can be pervasive for a whole host of reasons, whether it's retirements, pilot turnover, you name it. But every time something happens, the same situation arises. And you have to, again, reshuffle the deck. You need to re-engage in a certain way and get the forward momentum built back up. The key, though, to improving safety over time is not to just keep bobbing up and down above the high performing line. It's to do better than that. And that's why, again, you want to think about safety in terms of the people, process, and technology end, because what you really want to strive for is something that looks more like this, right? You spend the time getting to a great point. When that retirement happens, yes, you'll take a backward step, but perhaps not as far down as you think. And then if there's some more turnover down the road, again, maybe a little bit of a backward step, but again, forward momentum on an upward trajectory. So again, if we can think about it organizationally as a way to continue moving in a positive direction and improving the performance, then this is really what we want to achieve. And you're going to be able to do this if you foster continual learning, you have obviously a strong culture, and the organization is never forgetting lessons learned, which can tie back to technology and tools and things of that nature. So fundamentally, that's what we want to think about when we look at our organization and trying to move the needle and continually move the needle. Now, how do we do this? So when you think about any organization, no matter what type you have, you've got your goals on the left, and then whether you accomplish it or not is on the right. And there's really two phases ultimately to be able to achieve that. The first one is organizational preparedness, and the second one is personnel execution. Now, I'm a huge sports fan, and I don't know how many of you out there are Kansas City Chief fans. I am not. But Andy Reid, as their coach, used to be a coach of my Philadelphia Eagles. And he was infamous for having a phrase about he never put his players in the right position to execute. And of course, as a fan that was scorned from winning a Super Bowl, we would always question his coaching ability, right? But as you can see in this little graphic here, the coaches do have to put players in position to succeed, but the players have to execute the plan, right? And that's so true in our world as well, whether you're in maintenance, whether you're in flight ops, whether you're a pilot, no matter what you do, the organization expects you to do it a certain way, but then you need to execute that. So it really is sort of two ends of the spectrum, and that's what we're going to focus on. How do we make sure that the personnel execution is the best that it can be today? So again, keeping with a sports theme, one of the things that's really influenced me for quite some time, I have two grown kids now, but I was deeply involved in coaching sports, and I learned a really cool lesson that I think is very much a keep it simple type approach. And again, this is something that's been studied quite a bit. Rutgers Youth Sports is there, but there's a phrase that's really taught to coaches, and that is, am I ready? Is my team ready? And is the field ready? And if you extrapolate that to aviation, or quite frankly, any business, the am I ready part, that's the leadership part. So as I sit in my seat and I say to myself, am I doing all I can to be a leader? Am I helping my team move forward by being the leader that they need? Is something that you constantly have to evaluate. Is my team ready? Is represented by your staff, right? Do they have the skills to execute the job that they're being asked to do? Are they being trained the best that they can be? Are they physically able to perform the task that's being asked? Are they psychologically in a right place to do what's being asked? And more importantly, are they emotionally aligned to what's being asked? And again, these are things that span each individual person, all the departments, all your leadership team, and so forth. But it's important that you think about all these different perspectives. And then last but not least is the field ready, right? And in the case of aviation, we're talking about, is our aircraft ready to go? Is the hangar in good order? Is the airfield fully available? And is the equipment in good working condition, and so forth? Now, again, when we step back and we say to ourselves, well, this is about safety culture and so forth, if my team isn't doing the things that they need to do, then that could mean my aircraft's not in the best situation, or the hangar is a trap for safety problems to come. So there's situations here that, again, you have to look at the three-legged stool here and think about all these different perspectives and how they all interplay with one another. So again, thinking along very simple lines of, am I ready? Is my team ready? Is the field ready? Helps you really break down some areas to really focus on across your organization. So let's look at SMS. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of all of the different components of SMS. I'm sure you guys have all seen this more than enough times. But this is the FAA graphic. Again, I think it's very clean and covers the things that need to be obviously covered. But let's look at the people touch points in each of these. When you think about safety policy, what you really need here is leaders who truly have the conviction for safe operations, right? You also need leaders who prefer to teach over punitive measures. And you need staff who are going to buy into that conviction, and staff who are willing to contribute and participate, right? Again, you can lay out what a policy looks like. That's the preparedness part. But on the execution side, people have to do these things. And that's where those touch points really reside. When we move on to the next component, safety risk management, you need staff that are eager to report even the smallest of things, right? Sometimes we get in the mindset that safety reporting is only for when the bad stuff happens. Well, the reality of it is, little things that contribute to near misses, if left unchecked, could lead to big problems in the future. So you need staff willing to own up to things that, while it didn't go bad, we didn't follow a certain procedure, and we got to get to the bottom of that so that we don't make a problem in the future, right? You need staff willing to support investigations to really find out why things happened, right? It's not just about what was the outcome of an event, or what was the deviation that occurred, but why did that occur? And be willing to really think about it in the broadest terms to really uncover all of those things that potentially can be addressed which when addressed, obviously will hopefully reduce safety problems in the future. You need management willing to trust the information and make changes. And you also need staff willing to accept changes that come about from this. Again, all people related things. On the safety assurance side, you need staff diligence to process consistency, right? When we take the time to put in place good procedures, our expectation is that everyone follows the procedures, and all the time, not some of the time, all the time. And that's important, right? You need staff integrity during the audits, right? It's making sure that we're not putting on a show for the auditor. We're actually doing what we do every day, and we'll uncover things that we need to fix. You need management's acceptance of those findings, and more importantly, their conviction towards addressing them, which is very fundamental to again, making sure that you're plugging holes or moving the organization forward. Lastly, from a safety promotion standpoint, you need management mindset around being proactive to promote safety, right? This is not something that just happens. This is stuff that you have to go out of your way to think about promoting all the time and become a cheerleader, keep people up to date. And we'll talk about some examples later on. But more importantly, you need your staff. They have to have a desire to read and understand what's being sent to them, right? They have to buy in to what that continued learning looks like. Again, people type characteristics. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is making sure we put people in the right positions and get them motivated so that all the things you see on the screen here are things that people actually do. So let's start off with culture, because culture really is fundamentally what everyone contributes to and takes from, essentially. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen Amy Grubb, present. First and foremost, Amy's a great person. Secondly, she knows her stuff beyond a doubt. But she presents all the time at different safety forums, particularly at the Bombardier Safety Forum, and she just does a wonderful job. I really like this quote that she put out in the past, where culture is the story of your organization as told by the behaviors of its employees. And I think that is really pretty telling, right? That pretty much says, doesn't matter who's watching anybody do anything, the right things are being done all the time. And I think that's fundamental. What was really interesting about her presentation at the last Bombardier Safety Standpoint is she carried it a step forward, and she mentioned a quote by Richard McFadden, where in talking about the behaviors of employees, there's two ways to look at those, right? There could be mistakes, and then there could, well, in the case of Richard McFadden's quote, a crime. Let's maybe tailor it back and say a mistake and someone who purposely didn't do what they were supposed to do. So Amy's last presentation, which if you haven't seen is on the Bombardier Safety Stand Down website, you can watch it at your leisure. But she really went on in that talk to really focus on the behaviors around the intention component, right? What happened, and was that the employee's intention to happen? Because that really distinguishes between mistakes and malicious intent, which is important. And that whole concept of intention is really what gets us into the just culture conversation. So Lucien Leap here has a nice little quote, right? The greatest impediment to advancing error prevention is punishing people for making mistakes. I just had it on a webinar as part of our OSO webinar series a month or two back, and one of the FBO leaders talked about an accident that happened that really was the result of a mistake of a line service tech fueling an airplane. And he could tell that tech was just completely distraught because he genuinely cared about his job. So in that instance, obviously that employee went on to learn a very valuable lesson. Yes, it cost him a lot of money, but he goes on to point out that that employee was someone who took the lesson learned and would probably be the last person in the world who would ever have that same mistake happen to. So again, when you really look at what occurs, you have to really break down whether it was a mistake or malicious intent. So looking at the true definition of just culture, this is all about making sure you don't punish people for their actions and omissions according to their experience and their training. But the other side of that is that you do, basically address when there is negligence, deliberate violations, and destructive actions. Right, so it's two sides, making sure you look at what happened and address it in the right vein, given the situation of the person involved. Moving on to safety culture specifically, in order to really, and Kelly and I have had a pretty good conversations recently about the delineation between safety culture and corporate culture. Is there a difference? Are they influenced with one another? And we both feel that, for the most part, safety culture really is part of your organizational culture. If you have good organizational culture, then your safety culture is going to follow suit. Yes, there could be pockets of differences and so forth, but the general theme, the general undercurrent should be consistent. And there are other types of cultures throughout your organization as well, right? Financial culture and things of that nature. So the point of this, what you're seeing on the screen here is that as you address culture, other cultural elements start to take shape as well. So culture really is pervasive, particularly in aviation. When you think about safety being so intertwined in all of the different business processes that we do, it's really hard to separate out those two. So it's important to really address culture as broad as possible, but then also as specific as possible when it comes to culture. And then as I was developing the presentation for today, I just wanted to have some fun and say, well, what happens if we just Googled it? What if you just Google culture and how to address organizational culture? So I just threw some slap things on here just to kind of look at the core themes that immediately bubble out. And I highlighted a bunch here, right? You see things like shared norms, shared values, valuing differences, customer focused. And customer doesn't just mean your customer. Customer could mean other departments within your organization, right? The maintenance department's customer is the pilots, right? The pilots also are a customer to the dispatch team. So, I mean, there's customers all around the organization that you can be mindful of. Having empathy in what you're working on, making sure you appreciate how what you're doing affects others. And then the bottom one is really important, right? Consistently seeing others taking quality focused actions throughout your organization. So again, there's a million ways you can slice what culture is and so forth, but as you do any kind of research on it, you're going to find those common themes come out, and those are the things we want to strive for. So let's talk about that. So how do you hire people or bring people onto the team that really focus on culture? How do you improve the culture? And one of the people that I like to follow is Simon Sinek. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of his work, but I have a link there for you. And this is on YouTube. I think it's like 2-minute blurb, but it's a really interesting one. He goes on to describe bringing high-performing teams together, and he describes the work he's done with the Navy SEALs and the way they look at forming arguably one of the most highly skilled operational teams in the world. And he describes how they really view people's contributions to the team on sort of a two-dimensional axis. On the y-axis is how good of a performer are they, and on the x-axis is how well can they be trusted, like what are their personal characteristics towards the team. So fundamentally, this is something that can carry into any team, right? And when you think about building a team, what you really want to think about is, first of all, nobody wants to have a low performer and a low trust person, right? That's just somebody you would not want to hire. Conversely, everyone would love to hire a high performer and a high trust person. But he goes on to point out, and again, if you get a chance to watch this, it's really interesting the way he presents it. It's actually kind of comical the way he presents it, but nobody wants to have a high performer, low trust. And he goes on to point out that people in organizations who fit this bill are the most toxic when it comes to culture. And in the Navy SEALs situation, they prefer to have a medium performer, high trust individual, and in some instances, even a low performing high trust individual over that high performer, low trust. So it's really, really important to think about the character of the people that you're bringing on your team and the desire of why they want to work with you and how they're going to contribute to the team environment. One of the things that he goes on to point out is that in business, and this is any kind of business, we have a lot of methods to track performance at an individual, at an organizational level, and so forth, but we really don't do a very good job of tracking the soft things, the leadership skills of people, the interactive skills, the communication skills, and so forth. So to a great extent, oftentimes what happens at organizations is people get promoted simply because of their performance without enough sort of weight applied to their people skills. So again, this is important. When you hire, I like to think when I hire people, I like to look for the character element of it, as well as you can always improve people's performance through skills training and coaching. It's really hard to change someone's character. So I think these are the things you want to really think about. So let's talk about tying back to that three-legged stool example. I'm going to focus on the people side of things. One of the things that I really want you to think about is when you hire people, there's sort of two operational modes that people in. There's things they need to do, and there's things that they have the will to do, right? And this is fundamentally important. One of the things that I do when I hire people is I want to know why they want the job. Like, what does it mean to them underneath it? What makes them tick? Because that's going to tell me kind of a little bit about what's going to be their motivation to get better at the things they need to do, right? If all they're doing is getting a job because they want a job, then the will might not be there. So let's talk a little bit about some of those examples. So well-trained, right? When you hire someone, do they really have the passion to take that profession to the next level and improve themselves every day? When they're resourced and working on things, are they going to take the time to do it right and get assistance when they need help, or are they going to try to just finagle their way through it, right? It's all about getting the job done the right way, not getting it done themselves. How about from an engagement standpoint? Do they care enough and have the right intentions to make sure they're doing the right things all the time, not just when people are looking or when certain instances occur versus others? Right? They're all character issues. And then last but not least, encouraged by leadership, right? Are they bought into the mission and core values? Do they represent the same things that the company represents and espouses? And then do they basically execute that, or are they just head bobbing? These are things that you really want to think about when you hire. So if you hire the right person, you can always train them up. Let's talk a little bit about buy-in, because really buy-in is really what gets to the performance side of things. When you look at the definition of buy-in, it's all about staff understanding that a decision or some change needs to be made for the organization to basically meet its mission, right? And then they need to accept that change and stay engaged with it so that the company can continue to hit their goals, right? You've all probably heard the book, Who Moved My Cheese? As individuals, we're really not fond of change, right? So when things change, there's a little bit of apprehension to that. So we need to kind of work through that. We need to nurture that, and we need to foster people's adoption of that, because we made a change for the better, right? Now, sometimes you make a decision and it turns out the change doesn't materialize, but nobody makes a change with malicious intent. Everyone makes a change with the positive intent of improving things. And if it doesn't improve, then you might want to backtrack and make another change, of course. But the point is people, you have to be communicated to, and you want them to buy in. So how do you get the buy-in? Again, I'm gonna reference Simon here. His book, Start With Why, is an outstanding reference. If you need a good read, it's a quick read, gives plenty of great examples. He has a great way of presenting things. But employees need to understand why they're being asked to do things a certain way. And when they understand the why, then they can better understand and execute the how it's going to be done, right? If you just tell them to go do something without context, they might not have the buy-in that you're hoping for. So taking a moment to explain the why, and that why isn't just because it's good for the business. Help explain why it's better for them, it's safer for them, it has a better impact on our customers. Whatever the cases may be, whether it's single dimensional or multidimensional, the better appreciation they have for the rationale for the change is going to help them more quickly adopt what's being asked. There was another interesting study back in the 70s where they proved that just using the word because when explaining something has a really powerful emphasis on people's willingness to adopt it. And it's a crazy example. Back in the 70s, when they had photocopier lines a mile long, they basically asked people to go cut the line cut in line, and basically give different reasons for why they were cutting. So a because statement. Hey, I need to cut in here because. And in the study, they basically proved that for those people who cut in line and gave almost any kind of because statement, people let them cut in line. So it's kind of an interesting personal behavior that people will do if they understand that there's a reason that something's happening. So again, I offer those two resources for you to read if you want to get in more detail. But fundamentally, the takeaway there is explain why if you really want them to buy into the how. The other thing is that every person on your team is not the same, right? People are not robots. So I have a phrase I like to use called, you need to know the person behind the professional. So what does that mean? Well, it starts with personalities, right? You need to understand the personality of your team as a whole. You need to understand the personality of each person on your team. What do I mean by that? Well, what motivates each person, right? Not everyone's motivated by the same thing. What are their aspirations, right? Some people aspire to do a lot of different things. Some people aspire to just be really good at one thing. Understanding that is going to determine, again, the best way to be able to present things to people of different aspirations. Similarly, I like to understand what's going on in everyone's life, not to be intrusive, not to be the boss needling in people's personal lives, but just have an appreciation of what's going on, because I genuinely care about the people on my team. I view my team as an extension of my family, and I like to know that things are going well. And hopefully a good family life is brought into the workplace, and we can have a great environment that way too. But if something's going wrong in a person's life, everyone to some extent or another is going to bring their personal life into work, and you certainly don't want to have that get in the way of a safety implication. So appreciating what's going on in people's lives is a good thing to be able to account for. Finding personal connections with people and building relationships and trust, right? And this is true whether you're a boss employee or just teammates on a team, right? People on a team want to know that everyone's rowing in the same direction. We all have each other's back. If I'm having trouble today, someone else will step up. These are things that, again, good teams and high-performing teams will all look out for one another and carry the load as a group. And that doesn't happen if there's someone on the team who just doesn't exude the same sort of characteristics. So these are things that you want to foster through time. So how do you get people to really, do these sorts of things and really want to be part of the team? Well, I sat in a really good presentation by Craig Picken, I think it was a year ago. I think it was at CJI, and he talked about, from an employer standpoint, what are the things that you need to think about to retain employees? And there's an acronym, CLAMPS, that he offers, and I'm going to share with you in a moment, which really covers all the different dimensions of things that really impact a person's desire to stay with a company. Well, I offer that today here, not just to how you keep good people, but look at it under the light of these are the things that can also demoralize or demotivate an employee. And so when you look at these things, C stands for challenges, L stands for location of the work, A is the advancement opportunities, M is money, P is the people or culture, and S is the security. And by that, he's referring to the company is solid and not going anywhere. But I'd be hard pressed to not point out that the P in people and culture is not affected by someone who thinks they're being underpaid, someone who doesn't feel challenged or underappreciated, someone who has a 2-hour commute to work every day and is getting burnt out. If all those other things are at play as well, that's going to be brought into how they contribute to the culture, and that's going to bring the culture down as well, which could pervade into someone else's motivations. So the point here is when you look at these things, think about your team, right? Are they being challenged in their specific profession? Are they being given opportunities to advance and learn more things? Is the security of the company such, and is it being communicated as such in a way that they can see that there's a path for them professionally and a place they want to be at? These are things that not only help you keep good employees, but again, if not sort of looked at least considered, then it could be something that demotivates people and gets in the way of culture. So I offer that up as something to be aware of and think through. And again, every person's different, right? People are motivated by different things on this list in different ways. But in some ways, all of these things play a role. And I'm sure in each of your own personal perspectives, you can look at this as well. So how do we get ahead of this? This is where leadership comes in, right? Leadership and mentoring people to bring out the best is really a handful of things you need to do. The first thing is you need to empower your team, right? When you tell someone that the type of job that they're being asked to do, they have to be given a little bit of leeway to be able to do it in the best way that their skills can be brought to bear. And that's important, right? People are not, again, robots that are exactly the same in each and every case. So you need to empower them to do a good job with the skills they have. Encouragement, right? Getting them to think outside the box, understanding the long goal, and encourage to push themselves to be the best they can be. Celebrating their wins, celebrating their effort, celebrating when things, again, are being demonstrated to exude what you expect of the team. But at the same time, holding them accountable, right? If they're not putting in the effort, if they're not doing what's being asked, and this is, either sometimes it might be affected by some of those other dimensions I was just alluding to on the last slide. Just have a conversation. Hey, man, I notice you're not, doing this, this, and this. What's going on? What's getting in the way of you doing? It's just like doing a safety report, right? What's the problem? But get to the bottom of it. What's causing them to not do what's being asked? And again, there might be some really good examples of things that just get in the way. I'll give you an example. If someone's, really not performing, it could be because they're fatigued. Well, why are they fatigued? Well, maybe they just had a new baby at home and they're not sleeping a wink. Okay, maybe let's work with that person to figure out a different type of work schedule where they can get some extra rest, maybe start a little bit later, maybe have a split work in some way. If you understand what's going on in the person's life, then that might help you understand why they're not doing the things they need to be doing. So again, there's a million examples. You all probably have many that you can offer at the end here. But the point is, you need to hold people accountable when they're not doing what's expected. And people respect that too. I think if people genuinely care about their job, genuinely care about their company, they want to be held accountable, right? That gives them a little pep in their step when things get a little bit down, and they like to know that they have teammates who can hold them up, cheer them on, as well as leadership who's willing to support them and carry them forward as well. You need to collaborate. For many people who get into a leadership role, it might have been a long time since you were on the line. Right? And things have changed, things are different now, technologies are different, mindsets different, and so forth. People on the line can contribute a ton to improvements in procedures, right? Things like this should not just be top down. You really should use your team to collaborate on better ways to perform. Everybody's got good ideas to bring to the table, and you should always cherish that as much as possible. Which gets to teamwork, right? The team should be collaborating as well, right? When you have a broad team, people look at things differently. They have different ideas. They have different biases that come to the equation. Making sure all that's brought to the surface so that you can come up with the best solution is really the objective. Transparency from a leader standpoint, what are the goals? What are the metrics leading to the goals? How are we doing? When we're not doing well, let's get to the bottom of it. People don't want to, hear from the person behind the curtain. They want to see you front and center. They want to collaborate. They want to know how it's going. That constant feedback and visibility gives them that comfort. Again, back to clamps, right? The S was all about security. If they see that the company is improving, that gives them a good sense of, hey, we're going the right direction. If something's going downhill, then they're going to kind of pony up to try to get it back on an upward swing. So transparency has a lot of influence in terms of moving people in the right direction. And last but not least, as a leader, I like to think about putting myself out of a job. If I go on vacation and my phone's blowing up, then that means I haven't empowered and encouraged my team to do their job without me, right? They should know how to do their job. They should know what we're about. They should know the approach and methodologies that are acceptable, and they should be able to execute when I'm not there. And if it's the other way around, where they need a leader to make a decision every single time, I can tell you right now, that would not be an organization I'd want to work at. So I certainly wouldn't expect others to want to work in a micromanagement type situation like that either. So to me, I like to take the idea of putting myself out of a job. That doesn't mean that I don't work. But again, I'm part of the team. I help make decisions. I set the tone, set the direction, but then I let the team go do their thing. And I'm here as a sounding board. I'm here as a support. I'm here as whatever they need to be successful. And I think that's something that everyone can do no matter what type of organization you work for and what discipline. So how do you do this, right? At the end of the day, it's about setting expectations of the culture, right? What are we about? What do we expect? How are we going to operate? People need to know that from the beginning. And I talk about that in the interview process. I even have my team get involved in the interview process because I want to make sure that they view the person the same way I do from a character standpoint. Consistent action, not just words, right? I want my team to see me working as hard as they are and doing the things that I expect them to do. Decisions should be made by objective data, not just gut. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, a little bit more specifically. Fostering continuous improvement, right? How are you training your team? Not just in initial training and recurrent training, but what are other ways in which you're constantly getting them to think and improve in whatever discipline they're in now, as well as other things they might aspire to. This is big to kind of get people to really buy into what you're doing. Identifying and combating complacency. This ties back to what I said earlier about when people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. You need to be able to address that. And you've probably all been in organizations where sometimes the leader just fails to address problems, and that not only does the problem still exist, but that starts to become a cancer to the rest of your team. And you just can't let that happen, right? You have to address that. Everyone's going to be on the same page no matter what. And then standardization of deviation is part of that complacency thing, right? If for example, you've got your procedures and there are waivers against that procedure, obviously waivers are okay, they happen all the time, but and when you get a waiver, you want to go through and make sure that you're still mitigating risk to the best that it can be so that you can do that. But at the same time, if you continually waive the exact same procedure, you really have to question whether that procedure is the right one, or if you are genuinely, letting people just run willy-nilly all over your procedures. And that's, certainly not something that you want to have happen if you intend to be a high-quality organization. So the point I'm making here is that, you want to have waivers, you want to do the right thing in dispositioning waivers, but you really need to look at the sort of the propensity of these things happening, and again, get below the covers and understand why they're happening. Is there something else we need to do so that these things don't need to keep happening? Being the best leader, in order to achieve that, my number one tip to every one of you, and I'm going to pause here for a minute, is I want you to start by asking yourself, who is the best leader you ever had? And I'm literally going to remain silent for the next 10 seconds because I want you to put a name in your head. All right. So to be the best leader, you need to act now so that others put your name in their head when they're asked that same question a few years from now. So, and again, how you do that, there's a lot of ways, that you need to think about that, where you're at now versus where you want to be. A really good resource for that, something that has been very instrumental in my career, is Stephen Covey. I'm a huge fan of his seven habits of highly effective people. Nice little graphic there covering the 7. Some of them are personal, some of them are interpersonal. Really good things to really build up good habits. The book's an easy read, a lot of good examples, definitely worth the time if you want to pursue this sort of area. And then his other book, which centers more around leadership, is called, well, he's got many books, but this other one is also very helpful in my career, and that's Principle-Centered Leadership by Stephen Covey. And he talks about, again, personal, interpersonal, managerial, and organizational alignment. And again, all those sort of 7 habits interweave through both of these different topic areas. But again, very helpful. It's a great way of looking at both how you operate as an individual and then how you function as an effective leader. Strongly recommend it. It's been hugely influential in my career. Now, one of the interesting things, though, is that, again, leading a team is one thing, but there's also a lot of team dynamics that sometimes the teams need to go through themselves. And as a leader, sometimes you need to help stimulate that. So I don't know how many times, or if you've ever heard of the 4 quadrants to team participation, but it starts with forming your team. That team can oftentimes get into a storming phase. Once they're through the storming phase, they're going to get into a norming phase. And once they get into the norming phase, now they can get to the performing element. So this is true of just any kind of group, quite frankly. I've seen this in coaching youth sports. I've seen it in the different businesses I've been in a part of. I see it in my own family, where we come together, there's some issue, we gotta get it on the table, we gotta flush it out, we gotta understand where people are coming from, we gotta figure out how to move forward. And once people get that off their chest and we work out the problem, then we get back to a normal situation, and then we can perform. That's so important. And why that's so important in business aviation, again, is because we have a lot of turnover. And if you think back to those slides I showed earlier in the presentation, where performance went up and then there was a retirement and it dipped down, and then there was a turnover and it dipped down again. Every time you lose people, whether they're in a leadership position or just part of the team, inevitably you're going to replace them with someone else. That's a new personality, a new set of skills, a new set of biases, a new set of strengths and weaknesses. So what you've just done every time there's turnover is reformed the team. And because of that reformation, inevitably there could be a period where they're going to storm and have to flush out a problem. And then that's going to get back into norming and forming. So at the end of the day, this 4-quadrant team dynamics is going to be something that's going to happen all the time. And as a leader, you need to be aware of that. You need to coach that. You need to foster it. And sometimes you just have to basically lead them through the process. And again, personality mismatches can lead to that. And sometimes you just need to get 2 people in a room and hash it out. They need to understand what's at the bottom of it, and they have to determine, can they move on in a positive way or not? And if not, then as a leader, you're going to have to step in and make a change. But the point is, you try to bring these things to the surface, get them resolved, and move on. So let's tie all this back to safety. Specifically. So let's talk about just safety policy, safety program as a whole. Clearly, you got to make this more than a manual, right? This is something you need to act on every day. There's a phrase out there that SMS is not something you have, SMS is something you do. Again, ties back to culture. Really need to start thinking about safety as a core value, not a top priority. If I had a nickel for every time a flight department told me safety is their top priority, I'd be a rich person right now. But the problem with a priority is they change, right? The reality of any organization that's a for-profit organization is the #1 priority is to stay in business. I don't care who you are. So to say that safety is a top priority over staying in business is arguably not true. So safety has to be a core value across everything you do, and independent of the priorities that are sort of really high and dry this year. Your leaders have to buy into this. It has to be a commitment from the top down. From an organizational standpoint, everyone has to understand what are the mission hazards that you're trying to control for, and do their part to control for those things. When we talked a little bit about waivers in the waiver process, you can be really mindful of the normalization of deviance. You don't want to let that settle in, because then your procedures are really not procedures at all. They're just a framework that sometimes gets followed, and that's going to really affect, how people operate. And then last but not least, your risk controls have to always be used. These are not things for once in a while. These are things that should be followed each and every time someone does their job, wherever that risk control resides. From a safety promotion standpoint, it really starts with a willingness to promote, right? Again, you don't just hire someone and say, okay, go do your thing and we'll never talk to you. This is something that you have to continually emphasize over and over and over again. So there needs to be a program built to foster that promotion. And what are we promoting? We're talking about what are the missions of our organization? What are the hazards we're experiencing? What are the concerns that are being expressed? And how do we make sure everyone's dialed into what we need to focus on? We also have to talk about changes, right? What are we trying to fix? Why are we trying to fix it? And how's that going to look, right? You need to communicate these things. And then most importantly, from a buy-in standpoint, the wins. You got to promote your wins. People do the right things. People make the right decisions. When the organization is showing positive metrics and SPIs, you need to be able to promote that in a way that people start to see, oh, yeah, we're really achieving what we set out to achieve. That really makes a profound impact on culture. And at the end of the day, that happens when everybody on the team is reading what's being circulated, they're understanding what it is, they're embracing it, and ultimately they're executing. Fundamentally, that's how you make sure the culture is really operating. What does that look like in an objective way? This is an example from one of our clients. I like to say that a picture tells 1,000 words, right? So when you really want to think about describing the why, this example is something that was happening with a pilot community not doing complete flight control checks. And the FOQA data certainly demonstrated that. So, they would show at the safety meeting, hey, we have this problem creeping up and we want to get ahead of it. So the yellow arrow that's there is when the leadership team with the pilot community sat down and said, hey, we need to change this behavior. This is not good. This could lead to problems like the Bedford incident. And we want this to be fixed now. And as you can see, from that point forward, it was pretty much resolved, right? Yes, one other event happened a little bit later, but since then, that has not occurred again. So this is something that you want to celebrate. Hey guys, we brought this problem to the table. We addressed it. You guys all bought in, and boom, look at this. It hasn't happened again. This is just one example. There are hundreds that could be demonstrated. But the point is you want to celebrate these wins so people see that momentum. So let's talk a little bit about demonstrating leadership and culture. One way to really do this is make sure you guys are doing culture surveys, right? Oftentimes people are reluctant to tell you the real deal. A culture survey, if done appropriately, unbiased and anonymous, and sometimes you might need a third party to help with that, is the best way to uncover latent problems that are hidden. You want to also monitor your anonymous reporting rate, right? If you're seeing a lot of reports coming in without a name on it, that probably means there might be a little bit of personnel / managerial friction that someone's trying to avoid. Not necessarily the case. You can't draw an absolute conclusion from that, but you certainly want to keep your eye on it and just look at things with a little bit of again, get under the covers kind of mindset. You also want to look at your organizational consistency. If you're experiencing a lot of turnover, you want to appreciate why that's happening, right? And sometimes culture might be the reason. Sometimes it might be other things that are a reason that are basically producing a culture problem. So you really want to think about looking at that when there is turnover. That's why sometimes an exit interview is so valuable. You want to look at information sharing, right? Sometimes, the maintenance group is doing things that the pilots aren't aware of, and the pilots are doing things that the maintenance aren't aware of. So making sure that everyone's doing things within their department, but sharing that across the department so everyone's aware of how it affects the broader safety of the operation. Super important. And then last but not least is succession planning. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but Again, we talk about upward mobility. People want to know that, hey, when so-and-so moves on to something else, then I have a shot at taking over that kind of position. That's important to keep the consistency and continuity of the organization moving in the right direction. Now, as we talked about upfront in Just Culture, mistakes can happen. So the best thing you can do as a leader is really try to address the factors that can lead to mistakes. So the first thing we'll talk about is information factors, right? So here we're talking about procedures that are out of date, symbology or signage around the organization that's out of date. You need to make sure that people are working to things that are fresh and relevant to what's going on today, right? The second element is environment, right? Are they working in an environment conducive to a safe environment, right? And hopefully they're reporting things or you're seeing things yourself that you can address. Personal factors, right? Perception or cognition, fatigue, stress, complacency, all the things we talked about, that gets into the mix as well. And then, of course, organizational factors, right? Again, culture is pervasive there and without standardization, right? But all of these, as I've said a couple times throughout the presentation, even though some of these things aren't specifically people factors, they are things that will influence people's behaviors. And if left unchecked or unimproved, could lead to culture problems down the road. And then continuity, this is what I was talking about, succession planning. You really want to think about, and we always promote here at Polaris that safety should really not be one safety officer. You really want to think about having a safety committee. Why is that? Because more eyes are better than one set, I should say. But also it gives everyone a better perspective of the safety program as well. If a safety officer then moves on to something else, then there's somebody on the committee who's already very familiar with it and can step up to that position. And it gives people in different parts of the organization, whether it's maintenance, the pilot community, dispatch, an ability to learn something new besides their primary day job. So when you think about that, it really has effects on the clamps model, right? You're giving somebody a challenge to participate in safety. You're giving them a potential place where they can advance their career if a spot opens up in a safety leadership role or a safety committee role. And you're helping them foster the culture, and that's impacting their perspective to what culture is and how they can influence that. So again, it has it ties back to culture and they're keeping good employees and motivating new employees. So at the end of the day, everything we're talking about here is really about helping you be safe, not just about being compliant. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve in our organizations, and people are the crux to making that happen. So the takeaways, and we can wrap up here in a few moments. Really, there's four main takeaways that I want to leave you with today. The first one is that people really are the heart of your safety culture, and you need to think about people in a lot of different dimensions to really get the most out of them and have them want to bring the best of themselves to the table. Leadership and teamwork win the day, right? I mean, you really need to think about that in both perspectives. You need to start with the why before the how. So important for people to understand where you're going and why it matters. And then last but not least, this is a journey. It's not a once and done thing. This is something that you need to monitor and nurture, just like a garden. You have to constantly pick out weeds and add fertilizer and get involved. So those are the four takeaways. And we're happy to open it up to questions. But as I said at the front, we would love if you could, if you don't have a question in the question area, drop in a little comment about good things you've seen in safety culture, good examples of how it's manifested itself, or even maybe a bad example. I think you can learn just as much from a good example as you can from a bad example. So with that, Catherine, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Steve. Just great information. I always enjoy these and learn so much from them. We've got quite a few comments here and several thank yous. You probably can see them as well. I'll just start at the top, and you can pause and jump in when you when you like. How's that?
Sure, and just again, I want to introduce Cesar Gonzalez. He is our Chief Safety Consultant in Latin America, and Kelly Roby Cam, who is our Vice President of Safety Services across all of our customer base, joining us as well. Kelly's not on camera, and Cesar just wanted to say hi, so that's fine. But,
I saw him flash by, yeah. Okay, this first one is we have examples, I think. We have a group fantasy league within the department that builds bonds between people, custom minifigures of all the department peoples in a shadow box in our lobby that all of our passengers see.
yeah.
Let's
Great.
see. I'm just going to pause after each of these.
Yeah, I think those are really good examples of the team spending time together outside work. And again, you don't have, obviously we want to get back to our families, right? But at the same time, spending time outside work really builds camaraderie. It builds trust. It builds familiarity. So having a fantasy league, it's a great little way to kind of do that along the way. The shadow box, again, that you're really presenting the personality of the organization, which again, people take pride in their personality, take pride in their organization, and I think that's a great way to exemplify that.
Yeah. Exploring new tools in our industry, quote, whys that are aligned, and in-house training videos sparked by an internal recommendation. These are
Mhm.
some examples.
I think internal recommendations are cool. Why is it cool to respond to a recommendation? Because it demonstrates that the company is listening to the employee, right? Nobody wants to submit a suggestion that goes into the black hole of death, right? If an organization can, if a person can see that, hey, I offered a suggestion or I noticed a problem, and then sometime thereafter, it's demonstrated that the organization made a change because someone reported it, people are going to, number one, take pride in the fact that they did that. And number two, everyone else will say, hey, I see things too. I should probably put that in so that the company, addresses these other problems. So it just sort of momentum builds on itself when you do that stuff.
Yeah, that's the absolutely. Having all hands events regularly so people can get to know folks from other departments, and exercises training to share how each department works and impacts other areas of the operation helps improve team cohesion across departments.
Yep. Kelly or Cesar, you guys have any thoughts on that one particular? I have a thought, but I don't want to keep jumping on all of them. I'll add what I was going to say. You want
Oh,
to be
there's
careful.
Kelly. I heard
Oh,
Kelly laugh.
I was saying, go for it, Steve. Go, you grab this one.
I was going to say, you want to be careful that your safety meetings aren't just like megaphone blasting at people. You want to try to foster those safety meetings in a very dialogue based, conversational based, because getting them to engage in the conversation is getting them to buy in. So if all you're doing is presenting slide, see you later, grab a piece of pizza, and we'll talk, next month, and that's not going to really get the buy-in. But if you're bringing up issues, asking for input, getting people to talk through different things, share across departments, as was mentioned in the comment, that's good stuff, right? And that conversation that happens in that meeting, I can guarantee you will carry out into the hallway once the meeting's over. And that's what you're trying to get to.
And there's a comment in here that says banter in the hangar, right? I guess that's what it is, carrying that conversation. Also, related to that, promote the positives with safety events. Safety tends to carry a negative connotation.
Great point. I think that's one of the things that you're absolutely right. I mean, oftentimes we report all the negative things that happen. Oh, we had long landings. Oh, we had slip and falls. Oh, we had this and we had that. But how about how many times we've had flights that went according to plan, or how many times we changed the approach, came up with some mitigations, and those mitigations worked as we designed them to. Man, that's great. Right. So, I mean, yeah, so celebrating wins is just as important. I would actually argue probably more important, but it's easy to just report on the negative things. It's finding ways to really look for the positive things that I think separate the good organization, the great organizations from the good.
All
Steve,
right.
if I could parlay. Sorry.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Sure, if I could parlay on that one, it's especially important if you're new and starting an organization or a new safety manager, how you handle those very first reports that come in, and celebrating the wins in a big way and making a big deal about it says a lot. If you take that first safety report and we start with punishment, that will do some severe damage to your culture right out of the gate. So, or conversely, if you sit on it and don't do anything with it, because inaction is also an action. So making sure that we're keeping that at the forefront, especially at the outset of developing your safety culture.
Yep. And by the way, it's important to point out that even if your organization can't make a change to something that was reported, explaining that, number one, hey, your report was heard, we saw it, but right now we can't make the change because, then people can at least, number one, appreciate they were heard, but number two, understand why you can't make the change now, or what are the conditions by which a change would ultimately manifest itself. So communication is key, whether you can make a change or you can't. Explain that back goes a long way.
All right. And there was a question on that went out about the let's see.
I can't see the questions.
Sorry. Yeah, it's if senior, this is how as a frontline or staff, if you don't have, if your senior leadership doesn't quote get it, what are some things you could do? And one of the comments here was if senior leadership doesn't get it, have them shadow each spot in the hangar, go to a stand down, get them off the I
Yeah,
only know this department island.
that's really good. I don't know how many of you ever watched the TV show Undercover Boss, right? That's where they take the CEO of some giant company and they put him down, down in the deck plate, so to speak. That is so important to make your leader aware of what's going on at the line level is important. But more importantly, objective data. I think it's one thing to say, hey, we've had a lot of fatigue lately, or we've seen a lot of this lately. If you could actually go back, guess where safety reporting becomes so important, right? If you're able to go back and say, look, we've had 12 fatigue reports in the last 4 weeks. Clearly now that's an objective data that supports what you're saying to a leader. So having objective data when you present is important. The other thing is when you go to a leader, they're looking at things from a business standpoint. So you want to present things in a very concise way and explain the because to them as well, right? Hey, if we don't do something, this, it could have a negative impact on the organization. So explain the why to them in the context of running the business. So again, it's not just about raising your hand and saying it from a problem, but explain it in a way that they can better appreciate it, number one, and if they can better appreciate it, the likelihood of them embracing it's going to go up.
Yeah, awesome. I have one more comment and one other question. And also I was wondering if you could put the slide back up with your contact information. Somehow the presentation went away. There it is, perfect. So people can get in touch with you if they have questions. So one comment says, have senior leadership read the Fearless Organization was a suggestion.
Excellent. There's a lot of material out there.
Tons, right? And then also, just based on your experience, what would be some recommendations to selecting appropriate technology to support my team without making it more complex and laborious?
Well, I think that's kind of the message right now. Obviously, I'm biased because I work at Polaris Aero, and we strive to make our tools as simple and meaningful and seamless as possible. But at the end of the day, we recognize that our tool isn't a perfect fit for every organization as well. Right, so organizations have a different appetite for different things, and we like to look at things again across that spectrum. Right, if a technology is not easy for them to use or isn't helping their day job, they're not going to like it, no matter what it is. You also have to recognize that no matter which technology you choose, you still need people to be trained and bought in, and it has to fit with the procedures you have. Right, so it really is a three-legged stool, no matter what you pick. So you really want to think about it in the context of, what is your organization trying to do? What are the challenges you're trying to achieve? What are all the different parts of your safety program that factor into that? And how do you make them all work together in a way that, again, doesn't burden your team? One of the biggest challenges I think safety has is it's considered something extra to do. And that's problematic, right? Because we're all busy with our day jobs. So the minute you give the perception that safety is something extra to do, guess what? They're not going to do it, or they're certainly not going to do it as well as you'd like it. So if you pick a technology that fits well, makes it easy, fits in the context of their day job, suddenly they're just doing their day job with a safety flavor to it, and it's not considered something extra to do. And that will go a long way. So again, looking at your organization, looking at your goals, looking at what you're trying to achieve, that's really important. And then find the technology that best suits you. I would argue Polaris Vocus is the best one, but again, I'm biased also.
Absolutely. Great question. And that is it for today in terms of the comments and the question. I'm putting up some links to future events, including the Portuguese and Spanish versions of this seminar that will be held tomorrow, and then the ramp side safety session in June. Here is the link for that, and I hope that our attendees will consider attending that. As always, these are just fantastic forums, and we always learn so much from all of you at Polaris Aero, and really appreciate your dedication to joining us on these SafetyNet webinars. So with that, I will say thank you to Steve and Cesar and Kelly, and the next one on ramp side safety is June 20th. I hope to see some of you in the Portuguese and Spanish versions tomorrow or next month. So we will see you all soon. And thanks again for attending, everyone. Fly safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.